It happened over chicken and chatter. A backyard Sunday lunch, the kind his family insisted on having at least once a month, rain or shine. This time, the sky was clear and the elm tree offered its usual shade. I brought the salad out like always, my hands still damp from rinsing the tomatoes. His sisters were already seated, fanning themselves and gossiping about someone's neighbor who left her husband for a plumber. The air smelled like burnt barbecue sauce and that perfume his niece wears, sweet, synthetic, cloying. I was pouring dressing when he said it. A joke, if you could call it that. Something about my cooking, about how I, finally, got it right after 20 years. It wasn't cruel, exactly. Just enough to draw laughter, just enough to make me the punchline while he grinned and shook his head like he was just teasing. They laughed politely. But I heard the sharpness in it. The way it curved around the table and left me outside of it, still standing there with the wooden spoon in my hand. No one looked at me directly. Not even him. I smiled, of course. I always do. But inside, something shifted. Not rage. Not sorrow. Something smaller and harder. A realization I hadn't let myself face until now, that I'd spent years seated at a table that was never truly mine. I didn't say anything that day. Just sat back down, folded my napkin over my lap, and listened as the conversation moved on without me. About someone's new car, a cousin's third engagement, a sale on bed sheets at the department store. The usual chorus of everyday life. I kept my hands busy with refilling glasses and clearing plates. It's what I've always done, move around the edges, keep things running, stay useful. It's how I learned to be seen in this family, not as someone with thoughts or feelings, but as someone who remembered which cousin was gluten-free and who took their coffee with cream. That evening, when we got home, he asked if I was feeling tired. I said yes. That was true, in its way. But what I didn't say was that I felt tired in a way that no nap could fix. The kind of tired that seeps in when you realize that the people who say they love you don't really see you anymore. Maybe never did. I undressed slowly, folded my clothes into the laundry basket the way I always do. Then I sat at the edge of the bed, brushing my hair in the same careful rhythm I'd used since I was a girl. He was already snoring by then, one arm thrown across my side of the mattress, like even in sleep he expected me to make space. In the quiet, I started thinking. Not in a dramatic, storm out of the house sort of way. Just a slow pulling apart of memories and moments. Replaying conversations. Noticing patterns. Things I'd ignored, dismissed, forgiven. It wasn't just the joke at lunch. It was the way his voice changed around me when we were with others, how it tightened slightly, turned more patronizing. How often he interrupted me, corrected me. Not with cruelty, but with confidence. As if what I had to say needed reshaping to make it acceptable. And then there were the stories. The ones he told about our life. Holidays, vacations, hard times, funny memories. In every one of them, his role was central. Mine, if mentioned at all, was background, a helper, an observer, a laugh track. I began to realize how often we had become he when he spoke. We remodeled the kitchen became he chose the tile. We hosted Christmas became he carved the turkey. Even when I was physically present in the memory, my part had somehow been erased. It's a strange thing to sit in your own life and feel like a guest. To remember being the one who scrubbed the floors, folded the sheets, paid the electric bills, and still hear someone else tell your story as if you were just nearby. That night, I sat awake long after the room went dark. My thoughts wandered to earlier years. Back to our first apartment with its peeling linoleum and the heater that clanged like church bells every winter. I remembered how proud we were to host our first Thanksgiving there. How I'd spent days cooking, following recipes from my mother's old cookbook, trying to get everything just right. He'd thanked me then. Kissed my forehead, said I was amazing. I held on to that moment for a long time, used it like a lantern during harder times. But even that memory felt different now, smaller, dimmer. Because the gratitude had stopped coming a long time ago. Somewhere along the way, the roles shifted. I became the one who filled in the gaps, who made sure the dentist appointments were scheduled and the taxes filed. He became the one who got the credit. Not out of malice. Just because that's what happens when you're always the one holding the list, and everyone else assumes the tasks complete themselves. I didn't blame him, not entirely. He was only doing what I allowed. What I trained him, and everyone else, to expect from me. And now, sitting there in the dark, I started to wonder why I had done that. Why I'd let so much of myself go unnoticed, unheard. The answer wasn't complicated. I did it out of love. Out of that old-fashioned sense of duty that my mother taught me. That love meant showing up, sacrificing, giving without needing anything in return. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. That the giving itself would be seen and valued. But now, years later, I could see how the quiet giving turned into quiet disappearing. I thought about the invitation I'd never received to a luncheon with his colleagues, the anniversary where I ended up cooking my own dinner because he'd forgotten the date, the holidays where I was more hostess than guest. I thought about the time I suggested we take a trip, just the two of us, and he laughed, actually laughed, and said we couldn't afford a luxury like that. Then 2 months later, he spent more than that on a new grill and didn't think twice. I remembered the way he explained my opinions for me at dinner parties, the way his eyes glossed over when I talked about books I loved, or politics, or even the shows we watched together. How he'd nod, pretend to listen, but his face would drift, his attention gone before I finished a sentence. None of it was abuse. None of it cruel. Just 1,000 small acts of erasure that, over time, left me unsure of whether I even existed outside the role I played for everyone else. I went into the kitchen then. The house was still. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, letting the silence settle. I looked around at everything I had tended and touched for so many years. The kettle I'd used every morning, the cabinets I'd lined, the table I'd set for countless dinners. It all looked the same. But I didn't feel the same. Something had cracked open, gently but permanently. Not rage, not grief. Just a new clarity. The kind that doesn't shout but whispers, "You don't have to keep living like this." I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just leaned against the counter and let that quiet truth stretch itself across my chest like a shawl. Comforting. Familiar. A long time coming. And that's when I made the smallest decision of all. I decided to stop pretending. Not to him, not to the family, not even to myself. The shift wasn't visible. Not yet. But inside, I stopped rehearsing how to explain myself, stopped drafting conversations that never happened. I started paying attention to what I felt rather than what I was supposed to feel. And once you start doing that, once you start listening to yourself after years of silencing that voice, it becomes impossible to go back. Over the next few weeks, I lived my life as I always had, but with a difference I couldn't unsee. It was in the way I moved through the house, through conversations, through expectations that once felt like law. I cooked dinner and folded laundry, smiled when his sister called to ask if we'd bring dessert to her birthday, and I still reminded him to take his blood pressure pills. But inside, I was watching. Listening. Learning where I had vanished. I stopped offering suggestions. That was the first change. Not out of spite. Just curiosity. To see what happened when I didn't plan his schedule, didn't remind him of appointments, didn't step in to rescue his forgetfulness with my foresight. The answer was simple. He noticed things were missing, but he didn't connect them to me. Just muttered to himself about delays or the chaos of getting older. I stood in the doorway one morning while he dug through his desk for a bill I'd always paid on time. He didn't ask me about it. He never asked. Just sighed loudly, waiting for the world to set itself straight again. At night, I started keeping a notebook under the bed. It wasn't a journal, not really. Just a record. Of things said. Of things not said. The way his hand brushed mine at breakfast but didn't linger. The way he thanked the waitress with more warmth than he'd shown me in a week. The way his stories continued to shrink my presence into a neat little footnote. One entry I remember clearly. April 3rd. He told his brother on the phone that he'd handled the garden beds this year. I'd spent 3 days clearing weeds, tilling soil, mixing compost with my own gloved hands. He hadn't stepped outside once. I wrote that down. Not in anger. Just to mark it. Like a scientist observing a familiar animal in a new light. My days took on a quiet rhythm. I began rising early, before him. Sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, watching the light come in through the lace curtains. I used to fill that time with planning, meals, errands, family events. Now I sat still. I let my thoughts roam. I asked myself questions I'd stopped asking years ago. What would I do if I didn't have to account for anyone else's needs? What did I like? Not tolerate, not settle for. Truly like. One morning I opened the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the nursing school acceptance letter I'd kept for 30 years. Folded soft from years of being handled but never thrown away. He'd never seen it. I hadn't shown him. At the time, we'd just gotten engaged, and he'd said something like, "Wouldn't it be better if we focused on starting our life first?" He didn't demand. Just posed it as a thought. And I'd nodded, young and certain that love meant putting everything else second. I wrote that in the notebook too. And still, every Sunday, we went to his sister's. Still, I set the table. Still, I answered questions about other people's lives while no one asked about mine. One week, a cousin's wife announced she was starting a ceramics class at the community center. Everyone cooed and clapped. So nice to do something just for yourself, she was told. I smiled and nodded. No one asked what I might want to do just for myself. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at my face for a long time. Not searching for wrinkles or flaws. Just looking. Trying to see the woman beneath the rolls. I traced the lines around my eyes, the curve of my mouth, the silver in my hair. I said my name out loud. Once. Then again. Michelle. Just to hear it. Just to remind myself that I had one. It wasn't a crisis. It wasn't despair. It was something quieter. Like when you wake from a long nap in a room where the light has changed. The world looks the same, but you're no longer asleep inside it. In small ways, I began to shift. I reorganized the filing cabinet. Moved all the financial documents into my own folders, labeled neatly, and locked them in a drawer only I had the key to. I changed the passwords on the accounts, nothing dramatic, just subtle variations he wouldn't notice until he tried logging in. I began transferring small amounts from the joint account into a new one with only my name on it. Not much. Just enough to feel like a line had been drawn, however faint. He didn't ask about the paperwork. He never had. It had always been her department. I once would have taken pride in that. Now, I saw it as permission he'd quietly given himself to remain uninvolved. And I'd accepted that permission as a kind of compliment. She's so good at managing things. She always knows where everything is. Yes. Because I had to. I started attending a class at the library. Thursday mornings. Late bloomers, women writing new chapters. I told him it was just something to do while the laundry dried. He nodded, distracted by the newspaper. The first session, I sat beside a woman named Carol, 72 years old, who'd taken up oil painting after her divorce. "It's never too late to learn to see," she said. I believed her. Each week, we read stories. Our own and others. I listened to women who had left marriages, outlived husbands, raised children who forgot to call. Women who'd worked thankless jobs, endured quiet disappointments, who had cried in supermarket parking lots and then wiped their eyes and made dinner. And I saw myself in every one of them. In one exercise, we were asked to write a list of things we'd done that no one ever saw. I filled 2 pages. Fixed the heater with a butter knife when it broke in February. Cancelled a dental cleaning to buy school supplies for the kids. Stayed up all night sewing a costume for a school play. Taught myself how to patch drywall after a leak. Researched his medication side effects because he wouldn't. When I read that list aloud in class, my voice trembled. Not with shame. With recognition. I hadn't realized how long I'd been carrying all of it alone. Later that evening, when I got home, he asked what I'd done that day. I said, "Just errands." And I watched as he nodded, uninterested, already looking at the TV. That was when I knew. Not in a flash. Not as an epiphany. Just a calm certainty. I had been living a life that required me to disappear in order for others to be comfortable. And I was done disappearing. I didn't announce anything. No confrontation, no kitchen argument, no tears at the edge of the bed. That wasn't my style. And it wouldn't have mattered. Men like my husband don't hear confessions unless they're made in whispers behind locked doors or shouted in courtrooms. Instead, I made a decision to stop performing. Not life. I still cooked and swept and answered the phone when it rang, but the performance of being the grateful, compliant version of myself that made his life easier. I let that role fall away like an old coat, and in its place, I put on something simpler, intention. The first thing I did was meet with a woman named Evelyn. She ran a small clinic not far from the grocery store. I'd met her at the library workshop. She came once to read a story she'd written about starting over after 50, about finally using her nursing degree after decades away from medicine. When I asked if the clinic needed help, she looked me over and said, "Are you serious?" I was. Within a week, I was helping twice a week with intake paperwork and organizing files. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. And no one questioned why I was there or asked what was for dinner while I alphabetized vaccination records. He didn't notice the extra hours away at first. Or if he did, he assumed I was at the store or with a friend. I didn't offer more detail than necessary. If he asked what I'd been doing, I said volunteering or helping a friend. Both were technically true. But the more I stepped out of the house, the more I realized how much of myself I had stored inside it. All my decisions, my energy, my routines, wrapped up in someone else's needs. I opened a new account at the credit union Evelyn used. Separate from everything shared. I began depositing my small checks there. The balance grew slowly, but steadily. It felt like planting a tree from seed, nothing visible at first, but you knew something was shifting underground. I also started keeping records. Real records. Not the scribbles in the notebook under my bed, but proper folders. One marked Finances, where I kept printouts of bank transfers and investment overviews. Another marked Household, where I copied the deed and utility bills into my own files. A third folder, my favorite, was labeled Future. In it, I collected everything that pointed forward. The pamphlet from a coastal town we'd once visited where I'd seen a little bookstore for sale. The flyer from the Adult Education Center offering courses in business planning. A note from Evelyn suggesting we partner on a grant proposal for the clinic. I didn't know what path I would choose yet, but I knew I'd have options. That alone was power. At home, I continued to observe him. To see clearly. He wasn't unkind in the way that makes headlines or police reports. He was simply entitled. Used to the quiet labor of my love. He'd built a life around it without ever naming it. And when I began withdrawing parts of it, when dinner wasn't ready the minute he came home, when the dry cleaning wasn't picked up, when I didn't offer to iron his shirts, he noticed. He frowned. He sighed louder. He asked twice where the spare toothpaste was. But he never asked why. He tried old tricks. Making jokes at my expense. Complimenting me in ways that sounded more like reminders of my place. You've always been so dependable, Michelle. I never have to worry with you. He wasn't being cruel. He was trying to bring me back into orbit. But I'd already moved. I remember the day he raised his voice. It was about something small. He couldn't find a folder he needed, the one I'd moved into my filing cabinet. He called out my name like he was paging a nurse. When I didn't come right away, he came into the kitchen, his mouth already half open with complaint. What did you do with the insurance papers? He snapped. I turned from the sink slowly, wiped my hands on a towel. They're filed in my office drawer now. Why? That's where I keep them. No, I said calmly. That's where I used to keep them for you. He blinked. Michelle, what is this about? It's about not pretending anymore. About not pretending that I'm here to manage everything you don't want to. His face flushed. Don't be ridiculous. I didn't argue. I walked past him, back into the living room, and picked up my book. That moment stayed with him longer than I expected. He didn't speak much the next few days. I think he was waiting for me to apologize, to explain myself. I didn't. Instead, I began changing things around the house. Subtle at first. I moved my clothes into the guest room. Said I needed space for my early mornings. He nodded like he understood, but his eyes lingered on the empty side of our closet. I removed my name from a few subscriptions, magazines I never read, clubs I never joined. I stopped baking cookies for his bridge nights. Let them eat store-bought. The more I reclaimed space, the more invisible I became to him. Not because he was punishing me, but because I was no longer making myself visible in the ways he noticed, through service, through smiles, through silence. I saw my children less, too. Not because they stopped coming, but because I stopped inviting. When they did visit, I no longer filled the table with their favorites or sent them home with leftovers. I asked questions. Real ones. About their jobs, their finances, their relationships. Questions that made them shift in their seats. My daughter once said, "You're different lately, Mom." I smiled. No. I'm just finally being myself. One night, he brought me a cup of tea. He never did that. It was lukewarm and too sweet, but I drank it anyway. Are you unhappy? He asked suddenly. I looked at him. This man I'd shared a bed with for over 30 years. I said honestly. But I'm working on it. He nodded, like he didn't quite know what to do with that. He reached for my hand but didn't hold it long. After he went to bed, I stayed up and wrote in my future folder. Not a plan. Just a statement. I am not waiting to be seen anymore. I will not spend the rest of my life hoping to be understood by people who prefer me quiet. My voice is mine. My choices are mine. My life, from this point forward, belongs to me. When I read it the next morning, I felt no fear. Just clarity. And a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. It was summer by the time I made the final shift. Not a dramatic exit or a loud declaration, just a reorientation. My life, turned slightly on its axis, now moved towards something I could call my own. He still lived in the same house, sat at the same table, watched the same news every night. But I had begun living beside him rather than for him, and the gap between those two positions grew wider by the week. He noticed. Oh, he noticed. In the small ways men do when comfort begins to slip. He began asking more questions. Where are you off to today? Who are you meeting at the library? What's the clinic really paying you? All of it masked in casual tones, but underneath it was the discomfort of someone realizing the rules of a game he thought he'd mastered were quietly changing. I didn't answer all his questions. Some I simply let hang. Others I answered with polite half-truths. Just errands. Just catching up with friends. I had learned, finally, the strength of not offering everything. Of keeping parts of myself untouched by his opinions or assumptions. One morning, he found me in the garden, knees in the dirt, trimming back the lavender bush. He stood on the porch, arms crossed. You've been gone a lot lately. I've been busy. With what, exactly? I looked up, the sun behind him making his face hard to read. With things that matter to me. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he turned and went back inside. That was the first time he didn't try to press further. I think, in that moment, he began to understand what I already knew: there would be no confrontation. No argument. Just distance, expanding slowly and permanently. I made changes at the clinic, too. Evelyn offered me a small stipend for consulting, just enough to be formal. I accepted, then asked if she'd be willing to co-sign on a grant proposal for expanded services. I'd done the paperwork already. She stared at me, surprised, then smiled. You've been thinking about this. I had. 4 months. It felt good to admit it. We submitted the proposal in early August. I didn't tell him. He wouldn't have understood. Would have called it a hobby, or worse, a distraction. But it wasn't. It was mine. At home, I continued pulling away from rituals that had once been gospel. I stopped watching TV with him in the evenings. Started reading instead. I bought new sheets for the guest bed and made that room fully mine, my books, my calendar, my silence. He stood in the doorway one night, looking around like he didn't recognize the space anymore. This feels different, he said. It is, I replied. It's mine. He didn't respond. Just nodded, slowly, then walked away. I began preparing to leave, though not in the way people expect. I wasn't divorcing him. I wasn't moving out. I was, instead, removing myself from the structure of dependency I'd been folded into for decades. Emotionally, financially, practically. And once I started, the rest followed with quiet momentum. I called the bank to review our joint accounts. Transferred the remainder of my earnings into my own. I reviewed our property documents. Confirmed what I already suspected: my name was on everything, but I'd never read the fine print. Now I read it all. Every word. I began scanning old receipts, organizing tax records, making copies of titles and certificates. I stored them in a locked box beneath my bed, one he didn't know about. Not out of secrecy. Out of self-respect. A sense that my autonomy deserved to be protected, not borrowed or questioned. He tried to reassert himself in other ways. Little jabs. A raised eyebrow when I bought a new dress. A sarcastic remark about women finding themselves after 50. But his words no longer landed. I didn't argue. Didn't defend. I just didn't respond. And when silence becomes your answer long enough, people start to realize their control has limits. One afternoon, he cornered me in the hallway. I feel like you're trying to prove something, he said. I paused, met his gaze without flinching. I'm not trying. I've already proven it. To who? To myself. He stepped back, as if the words physically moved him. I walked past without another word. My children called less often. They'd grown used to a mother who organized holidays and remembered every birthday with cards and phone calls. When I stopped reaching out first, the silence revealed itself. Days turned to weeks with no contact. I didn't chase them. Let the silence speak. One day, my daughter called out of the blue. "Is everything okay? You've been quiet." "I'm fine," I said. "You haven't called about Thanksgiving." "I'm not hosting this year." A pause. "Since when?" "Since I realized I don't want to." Her voice shifted. That tone I knew so well. The one that said she didn't understand why I was breaking the rules. "Well, what are we supposed to do?" "I'm sure you'll figure it out." "Mom." "Yes." I don't know. I guess I didn't realize how much we depended on you." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard in years. I didn't press it. Just said, "I know," and let her sit with it. And the world didn't fall apart. They hosted Thanksgiving. They forgot the cranberry sauce. Overcooked the turkey. Argued about seating. And I stayed home, drank tea on the porch, and felt none of the guilt I used to drown in. One evening in December, Evelyn called. "We got the grant." I nearly dropped the phone. "50,000 for expansion," she said. "They liked your proposal. They want you to manage the rollout." I sat down, heart pounding. "Me? You?" I didn't tell him for 2 days. Then, one night over dinner, I said, "The clinic got funding. I'll be coordinating the project." He looked up. "Does that mean more hours?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That's good. You've been working hard." That was it. No congratulations, no real interest. But I didn't need his approval. I just needed the words said aloud, to mark the shift. And they were. I went to the beach that weekend. Drove alone, stayed in a small inn we used to pass on family trips but never stopped at. I walked along the shore, let the wind tangle my hair, and thought about who I was becoming. Not someone new. Just someone no longer buried under roles. When I came home, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I no longer moved through it as a caretaker, or a wife performing duties. I moved as a woman who had rediscovered her name, her shape, her worth. That night, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off, just as I had months ago. The silence no longer pressed in. It welcomed me. The final step wasn't loud. There was no suitcase by the door, no shouting, no slammed drawers. I didn't leave him. I simply finished returning to myself. By spring, the house felt quieter in a way that soothed instead of haunted. I kept the rooms clean but no longer pristine. I bought sheets I liked, not the ones on sale. I started using the good plates on Tuesdays, just because. My mornings belonged to me. Coffee on the porch, a crossword, the slow peace of knowing no one was waiting for anything from me but my presence. At the clinic, things moved fast. The grant brought new staff, more patients, a wider sense of purpose. I wasn't just helping with files anymore, I was training volunteers, coordinating schedules, speaking at community events. My name started showing up on emails, flyers, voicemail messages. Michelle Lawson, Program Director. I printed it once on a business card, just to see how it looked. It looked like me. He asked about the clinic less and less. I think he realized it made me glow in a way he hadn't caused. Maybe that frightened him. Or maybe it just made him uncomfortable, seeing a version of me that didn't need him to anchor it. We began living like polite strangers. Shared space, but separate worlds. He cooked for himself more often now. I didn't remind him when we ran out of coffee. When he forgot an appointment, I didn't rearrange my day to fix it. The rhythm of our life was no longer bent toward his convenience. He tried, now and then, to stir the old dynamic. He'd make comments about how things used to be. About the dinners I used to make, the traditions we used to keep. But the words fell into silence. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just smiled, gently, and went on with whatever I was doing. One afternoon in May, I came home to find him standing in the garage, holding an old photo album. It was open to a picture of us from 1989, standing beside our first car, both of us smiling, me in a sun hat I hadn't seen in decades. I was looking for something, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I waited. I don't recognize that smile anymore. I stepped closer, looked at the photo. I remembered the day. I remembered how I'd ironed his shirt for that picture, then rushed to change my own when I noticed a stain on my blouse. I remembered thinking how lucky I was, how full of hope. You wouldn't, I said softly. That smile belonged to someone who thought being loved meant being invisible. He winced. I took the album from his hands, closed it gently, then returned it to the shelf. We didn't speak again that evening. And still, I stayed. Because I wasn't running. This wasn't about escape. It was about restoration. I had no desire to punish him, no plans for revenge. I simply no longer centered my days around his needs or his moods. I was building a life beside the ruins of the one I had lived, and I was doing it with deliberate grace. At the end of June, I received a call from a regional health coordinator. She'd read my name on the clinic's recent grant report and wanted to know if I'd consider consulting for a new senior outreach program across 3 counties. It was part-time. Flexible hours. Modest pay. But meaningful. She said, "We want someone who understands how easily older women disappear." I told her I understood that better than most. When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and let the offer settle. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed it. That I could be 62 and beginning something new. That I could be useful in a way that didn't drain me. That I could be valued for my mind, not my patience. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stepped outside to the garden. The lavender bush I'd pruned last fall had come back thicker, brighter. I knelt and brushed my hands through it, letting the scent bloom against my skin. My hands were older now. Not soft like they once were. But strong. Capable. Hands that had raised children, cleaned floors, held grief, and now, finally, belonged to no one but me. Inside, he sat in his chair, reading the paper. He didn't ask where I'd been. I watched him through the window for a while. Not with bitterness. Just with understanding. We had shared a life. A long one. And in many ways, a good one. But it had been his life, most of all. Shaped by his career, his habits, his family, his decisions. I had carried that life on my back like a basket, never realizing how heavy it had become until I set it down. Now I moved differently. Without burden. Without apology. I accepted the consulting role. Added it to my calendar beside the clinic schedule and my Thursday writing group. My days were full now, not of tasks, but of purpose. I was tired, yes. But it was the tiredness that comes from doing work that matters, not from contorting yourself to make everyone else comfortable. In August, my daughter called. I heard about the grant. And the new job. That's incredible, Mom. Thank you. I guess I didn't know you wanted more. I was quiet for a moment. Then, I didn't know I was allowed to. She didn't speak right away. Then, softly, "I'm sorry. If I ever made you feel like you weren't. It wasn't everything. But it was something." Later that month, I hosted my first dinner in nearly a year. Just me and a few women from the clinic and the writing group. I used the good dishes. Served a casserole I hadn't made in years. We laughed until someone snorted wine out their nose, and then we laughed harder. No one asked about husbands or children. We spoke about books and dreams and the best shade of lipstick for aging skin. When they left, I cleaned up slowly, humming to myself. I didn't think about who might have liked more salt, or whether the house looked perfect. I thought about how long it had been since I'd felt surrounded by equals. Not needed. Not depended on. Just seen. That night, as I lay in my bed with the window cracked open to the late summer air, I thought about the path I'd taken to get here. It hadn't been fast. It hadn't been simple. But it had been mine. I would wake in the morning and walk to the clinic. I would sit in the office with my name on the door. I would answer emails, take calls, make plans. I would use my voice. I would remember who I am. And I would no longer give away the ground I had reclaimed. Not for comfort. Not for tradition. Not even for love. Because love, when it costs your selfhood, isn't love. It's servitude. And I am no longer in service to anything that demands my silence in exchange for belonging. I belong to myself now. Finally. Wholly. And without permission.